tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
I wanted to talk about the firearms file because you may know I am a gun owner, and I have one of those evil, scary AR-15s that the Liberal government banned in May of 2020. In response to a mass shooting, well, not a mass shooting, a spree killing in Nova Scotia, which involved no legally owned firearms, which is a very key part of this distinction. So as a result, it would not have been prevented by anything that the Liberals have put into force, either through that order in council or in subsequent legislation, but never let facts get in the way of the government's narrative on this. At its core, the government said, we're going to do a 2-year ban. We're going to put in a permanent ban, but a 2-year amnesty period. And in that 2 years, we're going to set up a buyback program where we can buy back something that we never owned in the first place, which is your lawfully acquired and licensed property. And instead, the government has not managed to do it. They've spent millions of dollars despite not actually setting up this buyback program. They've extended the amnesty period. Now it is set to elapse in less than 6 weeks, and still not a single gun has been purchased by the government. I am still sitting on one of these guns that I am not legally allowed to do anything with but look at. I can ogle it perhaps, but that's about it. And business owners, as we chronicled in our documentary Assaulted, Justin Trudeau's War on Gun Owners, have still been sitting for now over 3 years on hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in inventory that they cannot sell, they can't return, and the government has given them no mechanism to offload to them. So it's a bit of a problem, but we have a legal action from the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights, whose head, Rod Giltaca, joins us now. Rod, always good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
I was going to have you on anyway to talk about this, but you've taken some action here in the last day. What's going on?
Well, we have prepared all the paperwork to file an injunction against the federal government for basically because they're waiting. Every time this amnesty deadline rolls around, the government waits till the last couple of days. And it stresses a lot of gun owners. People like me, I understand the political consequences to the Liberals for not renewing the amnesty, which I'm sure they're going to do it. But for the everyday gun owner, especially elderly people, as that deadline approaches, they start to get very nervous. And some people might even turn in their guns because they're worried they'll become criminals. So the reason why we file these injunctions, even though it's not absolutely legally necessary yet, is because the government is playing this game with people. And the reason I know that is I have I don't know, I would say 20 to 40 people somewhere in that region that contact the CCFR each time that this amnesty was coming to an end. And these people are stressed. And it's, in my opinion, it's the way that the government makes people feel small. You know, maybe we'll renew it, maybe we won't. So we just wanted to force their hand like we did last time around to hurry up, renew it. They don't have to cause stress and that kind of harm in people's lives, and let's just get on with it.
Yeah, the logic of it is that the government has prohibited these guns. They've given no mechanism by which people can get rid of them. Obviously, they can't, just turn around and start doing mass arrests the day after because they're the ones who have failed. So I agree with you wholeheartedly that we know they're going to do it. But at the same time, it's the uncertainty. And I think it's the government trying to drive home this point that gun ownership is a privilege that they can take away just as easily as they grant, to remind you that your rights don't exist, that your property is not your property.
Well, yeah, and most people, and rightly so, aren't involved in politics. Most people aren't following this stuff like you or I do, right? Mm-hmm. And it terrifies them. And to me, the injustice of that is ridiculous. And it's yet another example of how irresponsibly the Liberals run government. So that's the reason why we're starting earlier than we did last time, now 6 weeks to go, to file that injunction and make sure that they just do the right thing and they do it soon and not put people through any more hardship than they're already experiencing in Canada.
One thing that I would point out as well, looking at the freeze more broadly, is that the government's view was that lawfully owned firearms like AR-15s and other semi-automatic rifles, and including many that were non-restricted and used for hunting before, like Mini-14s, that those guns were a danger, even in the hands of people like you and I, who are vetted, who are licensed, who keep the guns in the cabinet. And it's so counterintuitive that these things that are such a public safety risk can just be allowed to sort of just exist out in the country indefinitely and keep renewing it. And don't get me wrong, I'm happy they haven't done the mass confiscation, but it undermines their own logic and their own basis for that order in council in the first place, which is that these things had to be off the streets and out of people's homes as quickly as possible.
Well, of course. And 3.5 years later, violence has done nothing but increase. Disorder and chaos in the streets has done nothing but increase. More than a year past the handgun freeze, handguns are still being used in urban centers by the same people that were using them before. So it's, again, gun control is about 98% political. There are, as a group, we know that there's a place for regulation of firearms, but regulation has to be reasonable, and it has to have a demonstrable positive effect on public safety. And what we've seen from the Liberals since day one in 2015 is the exact opposite. And I think the most atrocious part of that is they're using government power to do it. So you need to have a very high degree of responsibility if you're going to run a G7 nation, and we've seen exactly the opposite.
We saw a very different approach given by the government in the May 2020 order in council to their subsequent freeze on handguns. With the order in council, it was these guns are basically bricked. You can't take them to the range, you can't shoot them, you can't buy them, you can't sell them. With handguns, it was a little bit more lax in what you'd call the grandfathering, where, okay, anyone who has one, you can still use it, but you can't buy a new one, you can't transfer it. Do you think that was because they view handguns in this different category? Do you think it was that they realized how much they screwed up on the first one?
I think so. I think so. There's nothing stopping the government from pulling back on some of the provisions that they had created in the May 2020 gun ban, letting people take their gun to the range. You know, I have to do a series of videos this week with a very popular YouTuber at the range. I haven't been in the range in a long time. But I would just love to take the guns that I would normally take. But now I have to take other firearms because that are basically equivalent, because the firearms that I can't take to the range, you know, I'm prohibited from moving them. So if the government really wanted to extend an olive branch to all the people like me and you that haven't done anything to deserve to be treated this way, it would be to treat the May 2020 now prohibited firearms in the same way that they treated handguns. And I think your point is really hits home when you think, well, the majority of firearms used in criminal activity and firearm-related violence in Canada, the overwhelming majority are handguns. But they're saying, well, you can still use your handgun as you did before, just no new ones can come in the country and you can't transfer it. So those things in real life evidence that you can see with your own eyes show that all of this is a political campaign. It's not about public safety, it's about politics. It's about getting urban votes, scaring urban voters, getting their votes, and then trying to mitigate the damage among gun owners politically. So I think I would really love to see the day happen in Canada where we are making laws and policies with public safety in mind rather than a political motivation.
We know that gun owners are just a demographic minority in this country, you know, maybe 2 million gun owners, legal gun owners, and a country of approaching 40 million people. We also know that polling shows, thanks in large part to media misinformation, that gun control measures by governments can come across pretty well, which is why the work you do on education is so important. But at the same time, it would probably poll well for Justin Trudeau and whoever the public safety minister is now to stand in front of a big giant warehouse full of AR-15s and hold a press conference and say, we've just taken all of these things off the street. They would love to do that. So I'm really curious why you think they haven't. Is it just general bureaucratic ineptitude that has kept this so-called buyback from materializing?
Well, the buyback was never reality in the first place, right? So the Trudeau Liberals look at countries like Australia or New Zealand. New Zealand is a tiny, tiny country. It's like, I think, half the size of British Columbia, if I have my geography right. But Canada is a country that is 10 million square kilometers. So there are Canadians that are gun owners spread out over a massive landmass. And to create buyback opportunities in local communities across a country so big and so vast is a task certainly beyond this government that's proven its ineptitudes in so many different ways. But it's also incredibly expensive, and even just the administration cost. Plus, it's a very specialized operation. It's not like they're distributing checks or something in the mail. You have to have people that are qualified and legally allowed to handle firearms, to make sure that they're unloaded or can't present any kind of public safety issue when you receive them. They have to be secured because, God forbid, a gang breaks into one of these collection centers and ends up with 250 AR-15s, plus all the associated gear that people might inadvertently turn in. I mean, it was a huge task, and it also required a huge budget that could have easily spun out of control, and it would have been a boondoggle for the Liberals, just like the long gun registry was. So there's even political risk there. So there's a number of reasons why they haven't done it. Some of them legitimate, and the other, I think, political. And I think another point, if I were to add something else, Andrew, is that because this is political in nature, the Liberals always want to stretch things out so that they become a promise for the next election. They've done it twice already. So they're like, don't worry, urban voters, we are the only political party that will, bring these terrible licensed gun owners to heel, but you'll have to elect us one more time. So there's a lot of reasons, I think, why you see delays. And I think there's also a compelling reason why you don't see so much gun control coming from them right now, because towards the end, it wasn't playing well because they were banning firearms generally used for hunting and worse. So, I don't think it gave them the political boost that they thought. I think that it was probably more damaging than they had imagined. So I guess the real question is, what are we going to see from them in the next month or two?
Well, I would also add too that because it's dragged on so long, there have been other political changes in the country, and you now have provincial governments that are saying we will not allow police resources in this province to be used in any gun confiscation. I mean, we've seen that in Saskatchewan and Alberta. I think Manitoba as well may have done that. So you've now got provinces that are using kind of the one trump card they have, which is, we can't challenge the law itself, but we can say that our police officers will not be playing ball with this.
Well, unfortunately, the OPP does not reside amongst that group. It's
sadly, as an Ontarian, I may have to take up residence in Alberta when this eventually does come.
Yeah, they're cooperating, is my understanding, and in fact, it's my understanding that they're wondering, hey, what's the holdup? So I don't know what that means for Ontarians, but yeah, that's an unfortunate situation there.
So, I mean, look, you want an injunction. How long a delay do you think is ideal? How long are you going to be seeking?
Well, I mean,
until the next election.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 26 months is what we're after. But I think probably 2 years would be acceptable. I mean, it's been 3.5 years already. They haven't bought a single firearm back, and we haven't seen even a framework for a buyback. So I think 2 years would be the appropriate amount of time. But again, what I would like to see from the Liberals would be for them to just say, okay, you know what? Don't worry about the buyback. We're going to treat these firearms like we're treating handguns right now. Let the people use them. They haven't done anything. All these firearms have been safely stored here for 3.5 years in everyone's gun safes. And let people use their firearms again. Let them use them until whatever conditions at the end of their lives, like they're doing with handguns, and just stop punishing regular people. And I think that would be probably a good policy for the Liberals to pursue in the interim. And I'll just add one more thing. If you don't see that, because it was reasonable for handguns, if you don't see it, it's because they're looking for a new election promise to try to get reelected in 2 years.
Yeah, and I think you're completely right about that, Rod. And I would also point out that I'm in no hurry to have this done. I'm totally fine with just delaying it indefinitely, except I would love to see the handgun approach, which is to say that if you believe that gun owners are the problem, which the government does, and that, the safety requirements and the restrictions on where you can transport them aren't going to do enough to dissuade crime, it really doesn't matter whether you allow licensed gun owners to go to the range or not, like you do with handguns. It's purely punitive. conservative and short-sighted. And I think a reminder that this order in council was really like scrawled out on a napkin when Liberal ministers were watching CNN and seeing, oh, well, yeah, maybe we could do something.
Yeah, well, they came up with this whole plan in 2 weeks after the shooting in Nova Scotia, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then they've been backpedaling ever since. You know, they said that Justin Trudeau and Bill Blair said that they would come up with a buyback, at the earliest possible opportunity. And like we said several times just in this interview.
Well, and even if it were to be launched today, to say that it could be done in the next 6 weeks, like this is I think you'd even need over a year of the buyback being in effect to round up every gun in Canada. And that's a low ball.
Well, absolutely. I mean, think about how many collection centers you'd really need. You'd need one in Nunavut, right? A collection center in Nunavut, even though you're probably going to get, 50 guns up there.
You might need many in Nunavut just because of the size.
Well, yeah. And then their other plan, if you remember, was to get Canada Post to participate and basically send people boxes that they can put an AR-15 into, a functional AR-15 into, and then send
along your self-addressed stamped envelope and your AR-15.
Stick it in the mail, man. Imagine when a bunch of those go missing, right? And then, of course, Canada Post's concern was like, well, what are you telling us? Are you telling us that we're going to have post offices around the country where these packages are going to come in for processing to go to a central location, and we're going to have offices that have AR-15s and CZ-858 sitting around, and our staff are the only thing between those guns and criminals? Like, just it doesn't.
Yeah, the Canada Post processing center in Red Deer, Alberta, or something is going to become like better armed than a U.S. airbase.
So how are you going to provide security for 800 different postal locations, even the vehicles that are picking up these packages and going from A to B to wherever they're going to receive them?
Well, yeah, because under the licensing, I wouldn't even be allowed to walk the gun to the post office.
Yeah, there's a lot of details there that the government couldn't care less about when they made that. They saw an opportunity and they grabbed it, and they've been living with the albatross that they slung around their own necks for 3.5 years.
My producer, Sean, says it adds a whole new risk of going postal, which when that's the level of humor we're getting on the show, it's time to wrap things up. Rod Giltaca from the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. Great to have your cooperation on that documentary, Assaulted, which has stood the test of time, I think, because the buyback is still nowhere to be seen. Businesses that we spoke to there, I ran into a couple of them at your AGM back this summer, and they're still dealing with the same inventory they were dealing with when I interviewed them in the spring of 2021. So thanks so much for that and for coming on today, Rod.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.